When I started learning languages myself, I wish I'd had a framework of 5, 7, 10 simple rules of thumb to follow to help me learn foreign languages. You're luckier than I am because I've compiled a list of 10 rules of thumb to start learning any language from scratch. When you start learning a language, always make sure that you know exactly why you started learning that language. That is crucial. A lot of people make the mistake of starting learning a language without knowing why, or maybe they just heard that that language is cool, or maybe a friend of theirs is learning that language. These are not strong reasons. You have to find your own strong and valid reasons that are going to help you keep learning every single day. So one piece of advice is take a piece of paper and jot down your reasons. And you have to check whether these reasons are really valid and really important for you. Like in any other field in life, we have a number of false convictions and false myths that we tend to believe in when it comes to language learning. And in order to learn efficiently and well and by yourself, you have to get rid of these convictions. In order to do that, take a piece of paper and jot down all the negative convictions that you have towards learning. Let me give you an example. You probably must have thought or still think that in order to learn a language, you have to go and live abroad. That is not true. Or that you have to go to school. So jot down all the possible convictions and false ideas that you have in your mind and pour them down on a piece of paper so that you can take a look at them and start dispelling them. This is really important to start learning on the right foot. A very common mistake that people make when learning a language is to just throw themselves at the language without any planning. What you have to do is actually plan beforehand. There's a very simple way in which you can do this. Just take a piece of paper, jot down a date of reference, and from that moment on, you tell yourself, I'm going to learn that language. After that, you just have to come up with 2 or 3 simple goals, and you have to ask yourself this very important question. What will I be able to do within 2 or 3 or 6 months? This in turn will define the actions and the time that you will put to make it happen. So for example, you might need 30 minutes a day or 45 or 60 minutes a day. This is really important. Actually, it's crucial if you want to make it happen every single day. And this creates continuity, and it is single-handedly the ultimate secret to language learning. You have to learn every single day, no matter what you do and no matter your background experience. Okay, now you have compelling reasons and a solid plan of attack. What is the next move? It is to find good language learning resources. And this is the point where a lot of people make crucial mistakes. So how many times has it happened that, for example, you find yourself wanting to download a lot of apps, find books, and you find yourself with a pile of stuff and you don't even know how to start and where to start? Here's the catch. Find just one good language learning resource. And in order to do that, don't look on the internet, but go physically to a bookstore where you can establish a physical connection with that book. Leaf through it, smell it, hold it. That's the way you can actually gauge whether you will want to use that learning resource. Find one, use it, and then move on to something else. This is absolutely crucial. Once you have your language learning material, you have to learn how to use it. What is the best method? The answer is there is no one-size-fits-all solution because every brain is different. If you take a look at successful language learners, they all learn in a different way. There are some things that are common, but their methods are different. So instead of looking at their method, just take a look at your method. Start learning a language and readjust. So start learning a language and ask yourself, is the method I'm using good for me? Is it efficient and is it enjoyable? If the answer is yes to both, then you are on the right track. If the answer is no, that is, a method is enjoyable but not efficient, it means it's not good for you. If it's efficient but it's not enjoyable, you have to change. And you have to abide by this line. And remember, once you found the method that works for you, there's nothing and nobody stopping you from learning that language. When you start learning, whatever you do, remember this very simple rule of thumb. Focus 80% on language and 20% on grammar. Think about, for example, a 5 or 6-year-old kid. They speak the language without knowing anything about grammar. Why? Because they've internalized the language through exposure. And that's exactly what you can do as an adult learning a second language. So as a rule of thumb, what you should do is expose yourself as much as you can to dialogues and the real language, and use grammar only as a reference. So you can use grammar notes, or you can even buy a grammar book, but don't focus on that. Use it just as a reference to help you understand the content of real language you expose yourself to. When I uploaded my first video in Swedish on YouTube, I realized from the feedback that I had gotten that something was off with my pronunciation and intonation, and I learned an important lesson. You have to learn the sound structure of the language at the very beginning. Give it attention, give it care, because this down the line is going to make a big difference. Imagine developing the wrong sound patterns in a language, like tying a knot. The tighter it gets, the more difficult it will be down the line to undo it. The same thing goes for sounds. So remember, take the time and put the energy into focusing how the sound structure of a language works from the very moment you lay hands and eyes and ears on the language. This is going to make a huge difference down the line. Learning a language is never ever a linear process. Things change down the path. You have to keep this in mind when it comes to choosing the way you learn languages. So you have to constantly readjust your methods, your approach, and the time you spend with a language, because this is a critical point. So, for example, in my language learning path, what I do at the beginning and what I do when I am an intermediate student or an advanced student is different. It's different in what I do, and how I do it, and when I do it. At the beginning, I use, for example, my bidirectional translation method, a method that I use to translate a language back and forth in order to understand the basic patterns of the language. But down the line, when I have a better command of the language, I would never dream of using that technique. That would be old-fashioned. I would use other techniques to adapt and change my strategy according to my competence. This is really important to remember. So when you have found a method or a routine, use that routine for a certain amount of time, but remember that there will come the time to change that routine and adapt it to your new competence. Do you see this phone and do you see this paper? These are equally interesting and effective tools to learn any language you want. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that a combination of these two things makes the difference. So it's not about using just paper or using just digital, it's about combining both. It is scientifically proven that when you use a piece of paper and you're using your pencil or pen and you're using your hand, you establish a connection with the words that you jot down, with the words that you see. And you don't have to be at the service of technology, but you have to make technology be at your service. So technology gives you speed, while paper gives you connection. And if you combine speed with connection, that will make wonders for your language learning endeavors. I started learning Romanian a few years ago, but unfortunately I gave up after a few weeks. Why did that happen? When looking back, I realized that the reason, or the main reason why it happened, is because I didn't establish human contact. I kept reading books, I kept listening to things, but that was not enough for me. So a very important lesson I've drawn from that is that you have to have rewards down the path. It's not just about hitting the books, it's about discovering things, making connections, sharing laughs. And you have a lot of different kind of rewards. You have social rewards. For example, you can have a conversation on Skype, or you can meet a person face to face in a bar and trying to speak that language. Or you have cultural rewards, reading a book, an interesting book in that target language by a famous author, or watching a movie in that target language. And all these rewards create a sense of continuity. You want to continue. Imagine learning a language like walking down the path. You stop at certain cities and then you take a rest, you get to know people, and that in turn will help you keep going. And this is what language is all about at the end of the day. It is about having experiences, talking to people, having laughs, discovering yourself and discovering others. And ultimately, it is about sharing. So here you have it. These are the 10 rules of thumb to start learning any language. If you want to know more details, more stories, more pictures, more links, you can click on the link in the description box below. Thank you very much.